I have a candle lit in the back to pressure me into not making this a 5-hour ordeal. But hi, how are you? I read one book that I actively despise. That's a positive statement. I read a book that elbowed me into an existential crisis. I read a book that dug up all of the nuances of coming of age in a way that I wasn't prepared to confront. And I revisited a book whose genius is just confirmed. So I also did make it to London for that exhibit, and I was like, I don't need any more books. I physically cannot acquire more books. I actually do not have space for like a single other book. I walked into Daunt Books and immediately was like, okay, well, I tried. So I did buy a few books. I'll sneak a little teeny tiny book haul in here as well. The weather in New York has finally dipped below 70. I'm so excited for like fall season. We had a nor'easter this weekend, but it didn't hit, and so it was just rainy and chilly and actually perfect. So I'm very excited. This is just like my favorite time of year. I think there's something really nice about just like the weather forces everyone to be inside, and I don't have to feel guilty about that. It's delightful. Yeah, it's been very nice. I hope it's been nice for you as well. The first book that I read was Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I have read this book before. This was actually like my first Morrison as a fully cooked brain. Like I feel like I read Bluest Eye when I was very young, and by very young I mean early 20s. During the pandemic, Bookstagram really was like my little buoy. There was a group of us who read Song of Solomon. I was just shocked at how accessible this book is. Like it was super fast paced, super cinematic. We read it with someone who had read it before, and so he was kind of giving us Easter eggs, things to sort of hone in on. And although I was able to pick up on some things, I was just really fully sat for the ride, and a ride it is indeed. So this is a book about Milkman. The book opens with someone is on the roof and takes flight. We meet Milkman, we meet his family, we learn why he is called Milkman. It's quite perverse. And as this book continues, we watch Milkman try to understand where he comes from, who his people are, and it's sort of like a journey towards self. When you have a people who have been stripped of their lineage, of their history, what does it look like to try to reclaim that? And so Milkman is from the north, and he kind of takes like a reverse migration down south in search of gold, but also in search of answers. We meet all of these people, and we sort of start to piece together the tapestry of Milkman's legacy, his lineage, and it's beautiful. Milkman has a friend, Guitar. Guitar and Milkman's friendship is super interesting. The way that it's depicted in this book is very much you eavesdropping on like the realest, most textured conversation ever. Like their dialogue when they're talking to each other, from when they're children to when they're men, just has so much truth in it and maintains so much of actual quippy, playful, and kind of like not meant to be overheard dialogue. Like she's just so good at capturing real moments between people. As they're aging, Milkman is having his little flings, his little affairs with guitars. He's kind of like entangled in this morally dubious society where for every Black person that is murdered, they sort of organize to kill a random white person in the same way. So the event that we sort of observe is the Birmingham bombing of the 4 little girls. They're sort of orchestrating how to replicate that same sort of unaliving to a random white person. I remember the first time I read it, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. I still don't know how I feel about it, but that's what Guitar is doing. Morrison, in an interview, has spoken about how there have been records of people who were enslaved sort of just running into the field and flying off. So the flying children of Solomon. She was really enraptured by this idea. That's the sort of story that continues to bob up as you move through, and then in the end, it culminates in a really beautiful way. Another thing I'll say is that this is a book about Milkman and his journey to find himself, but it's also about the women. So we have Pilot, who was earlier described as a woman who you can't get shoes on. She's like this wild woman. We meet her tenacity, we meet her drive, we meet her convictions. I love her. Pilot, then Reba, and then Hagar. So we have these like 3 generations of women in the story, and their voices threaten to overtake the book, which I was never upset about. There's an interview with Morrison for the NYPL where she talks about how she listens for her characters. And she talks about how Pilot was one of those characters who like spoke a little too much. Like she says that all of her characters tell her their story, and they are the ones that sort of guide the thing, but Pilot was one of those characters who she had to shut her up, she says. I'm actually going to insert the clip here because I love that clip.
Some of them you have to shut up because, like other ghosts or all ghosts, they don't have any conversation except about themselves. So I remember that was very true with Pilot.
Oh, Pilot, my God.
I had to just shut her up because she was eating up the book. She was really eating it up. And it wasn't about her. I mean, she was in it, but it was the Song of Solomon.
So as much as this is a story about this man trying to find his people and his lineage and his history, it's also about the women. And Hagar, she's like literally driven mad by heartbreak, and the depiction of that, how Morrison brought that to life, was it was rough. It was rough to read what it means to sort of encounter yourself in this state. Like Hagar's sort of story, I don't know that I picked up on it fully the first time, but this time it hit me. It's just stunning. Like this book is super, super beautiful. Like when I think about Morrison's and when I think about what book people should start in their Morrison journey, I really like Sula. I think Sula is probably my favorite Morrison. I think it's fun. I think it's fast-paced, potentially too fast-paced for like a first-time read. But this one is just, I think, fast-paced but well-paced. And it has these scenes that kind of just like stitch themselves into you. And in part, it's because of the dialogue. With every Morrison, you hear it. Like there's no way to not have like an audible experience with these books. And it's like really fun and lively. And I find myself cackling a lot of the times, but I think also, yeah, Morrison just knows how to depict theater. I think a lot of the times we fear Morrison because we're scared of how there's this sort of zeitgeisty idea of her work being inaccessible because she is the greatest writer of all time. And so I think that sometimes people think that her work is difficult to sort of get into, but this is such a good example of that not being the case because I think it's so heavily reliant on these scenes, the sort of way that people ping pong conversation within each other and how intimacy changes the texture of those conversations. Like it constantly just feels like you being in a place where you're not supposed to be, listening to these really intimate conversations, which is really fun. I will say there comes a point in every Morrison about 3/4 of the way through where it gets like super esoteric and I don't know what's happening. And I remember the first time I read it, I was like, I don't know. I'm just here for the ride. I don't need to understand everything. It was interesting to come back to that part and sort of be able to piece everything together a little bit more. Did I understand all of it the second go? I won't pretend that I did. But a lot of new things did emerge for me and I did have like a new understanding of a lot of new things, which was really, really cool. And something that was really cool about this read was that mostly out of necessity, I was like walking and I really wanted to finish the book, but I was walking. So I was like, let me see if it's available on audio. And it was. So I like listened to the last bit of it and it's narrated by Morrison herself. And that was just like an insane experience. I completely dissociated from my surroundings. And then I like finished the last 4 pages at home. And another thing is like the last quarters are always kind of difficult to understand. And then like the last scenes are always just like, what happened there exactly? Like the ending of Sula, I still don't know what happened there. And I felt the same way about Song of Solomon, but I was able to see it in a different way and it brought me to tears. It was like so stunning and the ambiguity in the ending was perfect. Like I was frustrated with it in the beginning, but like now I understood how absolutely impeccable that ending was. I really, really, really enjoyed this book. The next book I read was What a Time to Be Alive by Jenny Mustard. So this was a book that when I was in Ireland, I kept seeing it everywhere and then I went online to look to see when the US date would be and I couldn't find it, so I panicked and I ordered it and had it shipped here because it's hardcover and it didn't fit in my luggage. And then like literally the next week it came out. So this book is officially out in the US as well, which I'm glad because it's such a great book. This is a coming of age story that follows this girl who is sort of like experiencing all of her firsts. She goes away to college and she's trying to make new friends. She meets a partner and she's just trying to navigate what it means to be a young person in the world. It's beautifully written and just like this really wonderful exploration of this girl trying to understand herself. She's very obsessed with the idea of like typical comportment and takes notes and like obsessively studies people, will have an interaction and then exit the interaction and write them down and like study it. And it's I'm not gonna say relatable because I'm not gonna blow up my own spot, but it's just so interesting to see someone who is so concerned with how they've done in a performance with other people instead of like actually being themselves. And we watch how like these hollow interactions with other people. She thinks that she's doing well because she's sort of fitting the script. She tries to sort of fold herself into like the most palatable, perfect version of herself. And in doing so, she sort of erases herself. She does eventually learn herself and learn to like be comfortable in herself and with herself around other people. And also just to accept that like, yeah, it is you who people are interested in and who people want to know. I think the piece about just like being in a relationship and wanting to be as easy as possible, just trying to be like the perfect person and how that is hollow. She learns this at 20. I'm like learning that now. It's just really fascinating to watch this character and she's doing what she's supposed to do, but she's then like approaching things from an empty place. She's not being herself. She's not being vulnerable, because vulnerability requires the self to be present. And yeah, how that sort of leads to her first heartbreak. So a stringing together of all these lessons. Towards the end, she finds herself and she mends, some of the relationships, and it's beautiful. I like really enjoyed this one. I wanted to read it, but not mark it, just in case I want to like pass it on to someone. But I had so many little post-its and highlights, and there were just so many like choices that were really interesting in this as well. Our character was so guarded, and sometimes even with us as a reader, like she would sort of guard herself from herself and in turn guard herself from us. And watching her sort of bring her walls down towards the end in order to be vulnerable and in order to present herself and be accepted for who she is. It was just like, I really, really enjoyed this book. I feel like I wish I had this book when I was coming of age. Sometimes I think that like when you read a coming of age, it's a practice in nostalgia, but there were some interrogations in this where I was like, damn, I'm feeling called out, and I'm not sure that I've worked through that yet. So it was like a very mature coming of age novel, I feel. Also, something else that I really liked about this is that it took a time, and what it felt like for our character was like a time that is usually so filled with like illegibility. She takes this very tangly time in your life and she presents it in such a clear-eyed, crisp way. It was just rendered with so much like minimalism and so much clarity. When you feel the inside of the text, it felt very like forward moving and propulsive, but also there was this space. So it felt like you were sort of suspended, but also like thrusted forward. I don't know. I thought the explorations were really interesting, the interrogations and the questions that were asked, what our character was confronting, and how I just felt like it wasn't a typical coming of age novel. It was a little more introspective and a little more nuanced and a little more complicated. And I loved this. I really, really had a good time with this book. The next book I read, which I do not have, was called Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico, translated by Sophie Hughes. This book, I picked this book up fully thinking that it was going to be like a very vibey aesthetic, like, ooh, millennials living in Berlin. I really thought it was going to be a frou-frou shorty that I was going to get through quickly. And then it like detonated and caused like a full existential spiral in me. So that was fun. These two characters, they're moving through all of these like beautiful places. Like they moved to Berlin and they live in this beautiful apartment. The first few chapters is just like looking at all of the angles of this apartment and their monstera and the light pouring in and like all of these beautiful things. And they're like part-time renting their apartment. So like you see them not really fill the space. So there's like this minimalism, not just in the aesthetic, but in how much they inhabit the space that they're in. They're talking about like their life in Berlin and all of these communities that they get to like tap into. They're talking about like the art scene and how the art scene is where you connect with other people who are kind of like on the same path. And it talks about how they were able to escape a life that is like entrapped by their childhood homes. They were able to escape like traditional domesticity, marriage, motherhood, parenting kind of script. And there is this like sense that they have reached a liberty, like they're freelancers, right? So they have like as little tethers to them as possible. But then as the novel continues, you realize how hollow this is. Like they continue to seek and search for something, but their lives still seem disappointing and like empty. Like they feel vacuous and everything kind of feels like phony. Like they're having this exploration of their sexuality as a couple, but it's like just because we don't think that what we experience naturally is up to par with what everyone else is experiencing. So let's like try to force another iteration of our sexual life together. It was all about the illusions and how those illusions are basura, they're bullshit. My sense of it was like, okay, you think that you are going down a path and you are living a life that rejects the thing that you believe to bring you discontent. But if that brings you discontent and you embark on this thing and this thing also brings you discontent, then like, is discontent the only reliable thing in this world? Like, is there no way to feel pure satisfaction in this life? And I do think like the answer is community, and they don't like, they have this phony community where it all is just like very superficial, but it's also very transient. You don't really have a community that you can like lean on, and I don't know, it just made me like spiral a little bit. Yeah, like what is a good life? Anyway, it really felt like a horror story to me. They just like continue to make these decisions, which seem like if you were to hear any of your friends talk about like, oh, we were renting this house in Berlin, but now we're going to go to Italy. We're going to live here and do freelance there. And like, I would be so envious of that. I'd be like, oh my God, you're living the dream. But in reality, like, it's hollow and it doesn't mean anything. It's like just not what it appears to be. It's just like all of these decisions that look attractive from the outside, but then once you're in it, it's like musty and moldy and uncomfortable, and you just want to go home. But it looks amazing when you're performing it. Just sometimes these decisions, which seem like the exact right decision for a specific kind of life, can still be the wrong thing for you, or just like in general may not be a thing that brings happiness, even though it seems like beautiful and aesthetic and like the thing that people who have figured it out, not just the thing that brings you contentment, but how to like escape the tendrils of traditionalism. Yeah, I don't know where that sentence was going, but like, yeah, this fully messed me up. This book was really asking, what is the kind of life you want to live? What will be the thing that brings you that sort of life? What is the thing that brings meaning to a person's life? And how can you achieve that? I was also listening to a podcast with Vincenzo. He was talking about the book, and what he called this was like a crisis of authenticity, where he was sort of during the pandemic scrolling through Instagram, and he's like, wow, everyone is sort of living the same life and like has the same interior, and like we're all sort of performing the same thing. And so if everyone is doing the same thing, then like what is real and what is authentic? And then something that I really liked was that he was talking about the act of translating the novel. He is bilingual, but he did not translate the book himself. And he was talking about how reading the book that Sophie Hughes translated, he was just so impressed by her translation, and how even though he was the one who wrote it, he would never have been able to come up with what ended up being the translation of his words. And he says, it's not a translation, it's an interpolation. And I think that's really fascinating, where you are like the originator, you gave birth to this thing. The relationship or interaction between the thing that you have created and the thing that this person has interpreted, it's not just like an easy 1-2 conversion. There's like an alchemy that happens, and then you always come out with something new, which is why I sometimes hear the conversation of like, if you can read a thing in its original language, read it in its original language, which I understand. But I also think that the art of translating is so, when it's done well, I think is so fascinating. Like, I think one of my favorite translators is Julia Sanchez, because the way that she sort of transforms the writing, there is something that happens in her relationship with the work that gives you something new. Like, I read Dogs of Summer, and then I was so taken by like the choices that were made in the translation that I went to the original. And even though it has sort of the same feeling, Julia did something interesting to the text. It's not to say that Panza de Burro wasn't good. Panza de Burro was amazing. But I also think that, I don't know, the act of translating is cool, and I think that it's cool that he recognizes that he needed this other person to be like the chemical bond that created the new version in English. I think it's pretty cool. In the interview, he says if his English was 99%, he wouldn't be able to write in English because literature happens in that 1%. And even if his English was 99.5%, the literature happens in the 0.5. So I think just being aware of the nuances and the intricacies in language. I don't know that every translation that I've read has been attentive to this, but I thought that was really cool. The last book I read, The Bee Sting. So this is a book about a family during the Celtic Tiger. So we have Mom Imelda, Dad Dickie, and then we have the two kids, Cass and PJ. And it sort of goes from perspective to perspective, and we're learning about their world. Each of these characters have these really expansive and intricate worlds, and how they sort of all coexist with each other. More than that, we are learning about all of the secrets that these characters house, and there are a lot of secrets. So I tried to read this book last year. I got halfway through. We learned about Cass, we learned about PJ, we learned about Imelda. Once we got to Dickie, for some reason I had to DNF it. And I think it was because I was just so spent, because it was just awful thing after awful thing with these characters. Like, I was spiritually exhausted reading this book. This year when I went to Ireland, the bookseller there was like, you have to go back and finish it. And I was like, okay. Kat also wanted to read it, so me and Kat have been buddy reading it, and we've been taking it chapter by chapter. We've been taking it super slow. But then it got to a point where I was traveling and I had like all this transit time, liminal space time, and so I like really got into it, and I finished it literally last night. The last quarter of this I hated this book so much. I had to pause it. Like, I would read a bit and then I had to put it down because I was like, I cannot stomach any more misery. Like, it's just such a miserable book. And I mean that in the most positive way possible. It took like a series of unfortunate events and just like metabolized it into one book. There is not a single good thing that happens in this book. And I think that's what's so like exhausting to me. It's like incredibly bleak. I just want to shake every single person and be like, hey, be yourself. Just be yourself, please, because everything is solved when you are yourself. In terms of storytelling, like, I think it is a testament to Murray that I feel so heavy-hearted right now, and the fact that I like barely even want to touch this book right now. And again, these are all positive statements. It was just the most heartbreaking thing. PJ's like the youngest son, and he's like naive and bushy-tailed, really doesn't understand how rough the world can be. He's part of this online gaming community thing, and he has a friend. PJ's feeling like isolated, and he's feeling left out, and he's thinking of running away, and he wants to go to Dublin, and his friend is like, yeah, come to Dublin, you can stay with me and my mom, we have pizza and we have games and blah blah blah. And you start to realize that this little boy, Ethan, PJ's friend, is not a little boy. You notice that very quickly. So there's like all of this dread and all of this concern for PJ. You're just like screaming, please do not take a bus to Dublin. Then we have Cass, who's like very bright and is obsessed with this girl Elaine. Elaine is like the literal pits. I have never wanted to like intervene with a character liking another character who's like awful so deeply before. Elaine is the worst character I've ever encountered in my entire life. Cass is for some reason obsessed with her. We just see like the intensity of female friendships and how you sort of make all of these concessions for the people that you revere. We see Imelda, we learn about Imelda's story, and it's just heartbreaking. All of these characters have an inner world which they cannot express, so they're harboring all of these secrets from the world and from each other. You know, I was talking to Kat about this, and I think this is the most brolic miscommunication book, and I think that's also why I found it so impossible to get through the first time, and like what is driving me mad about it, because I think if any of these characters were able to say the thing that they needed to say or wanted to say, the thing that was heavy on their hearts, none of this madness would have happened. But everything becomes hidden and obfuscated, and in the place of all of these secrets, all of this awfulness emerges. And yeah, I hated that. I hated that so much. It's crazy to be able to live alongside these characters who become so real to you. You develop this relationship with each and every one of them, and it's such an intimate relationship because you want to say like, hello, hi, honor yourself and speak your truth and live your truth. You see the most wounded parts of these characters, and you see like the most frustrating parts of these characters. Also, I think the first time I didn't clock this book as like magical realism-y, but I would say it has like a touch of magical realism, which I think if you like hold allows you to move through it in a different way, but it's just a very, 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 very faint touch of it. I think the power of intuition was like an interesting exploration in this book. But yeah, that is all I'll say, is that I hated this and you should maybe pick it up. I perhaps shouldn't talk about this like literally one sleep from having finished it, because I don't know that I'm totally coherent on it right now. I think it's such an intense depiction of what happens when you are not yourself, you do not express yourself, you allow like the most real parts of yourself to be buried, what that loss means to your spirit and what that means to like the actual fabric of your life. And I cannot say I liked this book, but it was a fantastic a fantastic read. Those are the books that I read. So I did see an exhibit. Danielle McKinney, she has an exhibit. She has 2 exhibits going on right now. She has one at the Rose Museum in Brandeis in Boston, and that's her first like museum solo show. She also has an exhibit going on in London called Second Wind, and that one's only going to be up for 2 months. She was exhibiting there and I really wanted to see her, and I was like, Boston or London? Let's do London. I was there for like maybe 4 or 5 days, and I was like, okay, I want to just see the exhibit, maybe hop into some bookstores. I really wanted to do the Seven Sisters hike, but I forget that it's like rainy in London, so I wasn't able to do that. But just like walking through the city, I don't know, it felt really nice to like step outside of my norm. I have been feeling like I want to give myself over to creative practices more, and London is like the perfect place to just have like a creative reset. Everything is so picturesque and beautiful, and there's so much art. I really enjoyed my time. Danielle, she was actually a photographer, was never like trained to be a painter, but she just started painting. Her pieces are gorgeous. She always starts with like a black canvas. The people in her pieces sort of emerge from that dark canvas. She says that she likes to look at interiors and a lot of like beautiful spaces. She'll go and scour for these beautiful spaces, and then she wants to insert black women into it. And while I was at the exhibit, I was reading, they had these art books. So they had, I think there's one that's coming out in the States, but there was another one that is no longer in publication. So I was like, okay, no pressure. I'm trying to memorize this essay. But it was by Paola Palieri. She speaks about the idea of odium. In ancient Roman times, otium was the idea of leisure and ease and absolute inactivity in service of self-reflection and self-discovery. Paola was looking at Danielle's work as examples of odium. Like all of these women in these places, and they're in moments of reflection. They're always kind of like in moments of undress, but there is no rush. There is no place to be. Like the place to be is in that moment. I love that. I love a soft life. I love self-reflection. I think it's just in a world where Black women are often depicted in labor or in service to something or someone. I think it's so revolutionary to have Black women at rest, Black women in repose, Black women in reflection. Like that's not something that we often get. And so I think Danielle's work is incredibly important, at least to me, because I like to see myself reflected in that way. I was absolutely obsessed. I spent like 3 hours. I cannot express how lucky I feel to be alive and to be able to consume McKinney's work while she was making stuff. Like I think it's incredible. I would not have wanted to experience it any other. Like sometimes I'm like, you're gonna fly to London for an exhibit, and I'm like, I will fly anywhere for Danielle McKinney, because I think that what she's doing is like the most. I feel lucky, and that was like one of the highlights of the year, my life. I don't know, but it was pretty cool. So while I was in London, I also got some books. I was staying in Notting Hill, and there is a Daunt Books. I was just looking, and I was like, I'm not getting anything. Like I had set the intention that I wasn't gonna get anything because I just came back from Ireland, bought so many books there, and I literally like nothing fits here. But I was upstairs looking, and I saw Natalia Ginsburg, and I saw that this book is blurbed by Sally Rooney. And apparently I was talking to the booksellers there. You understand how this influenced Sally Rooney because you hear so much of like her present voice in this. Sally Rooney says, "It was as if her writing was a very important secret that I had been waiting for all my life to discover. Her words seemed to express something completely true about my experience of living and about life." So she was super impacted by Natalia Ginsburg, which I don't think I knew. I've read Dry Heart, and I felt kind of ambivalent about it. And I was like, okay, like I understand how revolutionary it is. And I understand that this might have impacted like a lot of the books that I really love, like Elena Ferrante and all of that. But I didn't know that she also really impacted Sally Rooney, and I'm curious to see how that influence comes through in Rooney's writing. I did start reading this, and it was so delightful. It has the most calloused, lively characters. It's so fun and like a very tactile read. Then I went to the other Daunt book, the big one in Marylebone, the one that has the 2 floors. I got The Mirror and the Palette by Jennifer Higgy. So Jennifer Higgy wrote another art book called, what's it called? I'm going to put a picture somewhere because I don't remember what it is right now, but this one is Rebellion, Revolution, and Resilience, 500 Years of Women's Self-Portraits. And I thought this was really interesting. It's blurbed by like Ali Smith and Olivia Ling. It talks about just like women perceiving themselves and how they depict themselves in their art. So I got it. And I was like sneaking pages while I was at the bookstore, and I really kind of enjoyed it. Did I also get this at that store? I did. I also got Aftermath by Rachel Cusk. I have read the first book in the Outline trilogy, but I feel like I can find Transit here. And yeah, I don't know. I just picked this one up. This one I think is like a memoir about her divorce. Author redefines herself and creates a new version of family life for her daughters. Rachel Cusk's marriage of 10 years came to an end. Candid and revelatory, Aftermath chronicles a perilous journey as an author redefines herself and creates a new version of her family for her life and her daughters. I'm excited to read this one. I walked over to the London Review of Books, which I was really, really excited for. And at this point I was like, I don't need to get anything else. And of course we did. I think the last 3 books I got here, and then I really like practiced self-control. But the first book I got was a Claire Louise Bennett book. I hadn't seen this one. It's called Fish Out of Water. It's like a teeny tiny book. It must be like an essay or something. And it's also blurbed. I love when this happens. This is blurbed by Jenny Higgy. That's so cool. So Jenny Higgy says, "Looking at art is not a straightforward experience. Neither is summing up an artist's life. Claire Louise Bennett's crackling, vivid prose is full of images, associations, feelings, and analysis. An extraordinary evocation of a great artist by a great writer." Is this about art? It might be. We'll see. I'll let you know. But I was excited because I hadn't seen this anywhere, so I picked it up. When I was at the front, they had all of these Fitzcarraldo editions. We don't have Fitzcarraldo in the US, but I do know that the blue is fiction and the white is nonfiction. Clap for me. When I saw this one and I was like, oh, this sounds really interesting. So this is called Transcendence for Beginners by Claire Carlyle. It examines life writing and philosophy across certain European and Indian traditions, exploring questions of childhood and mortality, art and religion, beauty and loss. Informed by her experiences as a biographer of Kierkegaard and George Eliot, as well as her own life, Claire Carlyle asks what one human existence can reveal and how writing can transmit its truth. Intellectually stimulating and deeply moving, Transcendence for Beginners enacts a philosophy of the heart told by a generous and compelling guide. I had the thought of I think I'm always kind of interested to read philosophy, and I just need to more explicitly have something that I can pull from. And as I am wont to do, I opened it and read a page and it was interesting, and the way that it's written is very accessible, so I picked this up as well. I was gonna leave it and then I was like, no, I need it. The last book I got was Sugartown by Maxwell. I don't know how to say that one. This is an Irish debut. I don't know, I had such good luck with Breakdown that I was like, I'm gonna risk it for the biscuit. The blurb on top is by Anne Enright and it says, tears through the landscape of the Irish Midlands with rawness, candor, and humor. And the writing was really, really beautiful. She's from Sligo and has a bunch of essays and poems published, but really, really excited. I think it's about she goes through a breakup and then moves back to her hometown and is moving with her mother, and what it means to return home with the self that you have sort of developed over the years, return to a place that only knew you as a child, and all of that. So that's what we picked up in London. Essays and articles were read as well. Samanta Schweblin's short story collection, Good and Evil, recently came out, and so she had a bunch of interviews going on. I don't remember, I'm gonna post it here, but she had an interesting interview called On Paying Attention to What Others Ignore. I'm just gonna share what Samanta Schweblin says because I thought it was really interesting. But the interviewer asked her, you have spoken about literature as a form of technology. What does it do? Y Samantha respondió, literature is a concrete and practical tool that serves us and transforms us. Fiction allows us to rehearse emotion, try out ideas, and delve into spaces and thoughts that we otherwise could not access. Is there any other technology that lets us confront our worst monsters and test ourselves over and over and then return to real life unscathed? Unscathed, but knowing exactly how much those wounds hurt and where. Unscathed, but with new information about life. I don't know a more spectacular technology. I read and write because I want to know how much things that scare me most will hurt. I want to test myself and ask, why would I do a thing like that? Would I be capable of surviving such pain? How? What for? With whom and for how long? We read and tremble, we sweat and feel our hearts race. Reading is not just an exercise in empathy or in broadening our ideas. It's no mere thought experiment. It's also something that happens to the body. It's much more physical and real than we feel safe admitting. It has a real effect on the decisions that we make and on how we see the world. Literature is one of our strongest and most dangerous tools. Her saying that reminds me of Bee Sting, because I feel like that was a practice in something. In practice in how much you can endure. Can you tell that I am traumatized by that book? Moving on. How's my candle doing? There was another piece in the New York Times called Two Writers Fell in Love, Got Married, Then Divorced. Who gets the story? And it was about two writers who were in a relationship and then they broke up, and one writer wrote about it and the other writer was shocked to see that the person had written about it. Just the idea of when you are with a writer that the most intimate parts of your relationship are fodder for memoir is terrifying. It's also interesting to see it as material for a memoir and then become fictionalized as well. How that relationship continues to live on through the writing of the writers. And this idea of can you ask someone to not process? Because I think for writers, a lot of writing is processing a thing. I think Gia Tolentino speaks about how she doesn't know what she's thinking unless she has written it first. And I think a lot of writers sort of process information, process their life through that. So when you have two writers who have experienced a shared thing trying to process, can you really tell someone not to do it? And if it's their livelihood, can you tell them to not publish it? Where does the line stand between you guys shared a thing, you consented to sharing the thing, and you don't really have a say in what someone shares after that? And this just really, don't date writers. That's what I got from this. I don't know how much of Liars, for example, by Sarah Manguso was autobiographical, whether it was autofiction. But I would hate for that book not to exist because I think it's a really important piece of the archive. How do you navigate literature as a body that informs a thing and also informs a time and informs how we conceptualize the systems that we're a part of? And so then if you ask someone to not write about an experience because you might also write about an experience, and who gets the authority to write about the thing? And I don't know. I also think it's interesting because there is probably most likely competition between the writers, and I believe the woman writers took off in the the man stayed in obscurity. I'm also just fascinated by like two artists getting together and then like the man being obscure. Like this is totally unrelated, but I think it's interesting that Danielle McKinney is not a trained painter, but she's married to a painter. And like I don't know her husband's work, but I know McKinney and she wasn't like trained or anything. But I think like that dynamic is really interesting to me. That might just be like la chismosa in me, but you know, curious about it. This is not new. I think like Anais Nin and Henry, whatever his name was. You see what I mean? It's such an important thing to literature, to the, you know, the monster that is literature and our learning and all of that. There was another piece in the Yale Review called Is Mary Oliver Embarrassing? And this was an interesting piece. This sort of spoke about what the things that you like communicate to the world about you and how the anticipation of shame can corral us from reading certain things even though we know we would resonate with certain things. The writer was talking about how when she entered the world of poets, Mary Oliver was always seen as very pedestrian and she loved Mary Oliver growing up. And so to have to sort of suppress, mask that love for Mary Oliver in order to be seen as like a serious poet, it's an interesting thing to have to like navigate shame around that or to navigate what it means for that to have meant a lot to you. But then she starts to interrogate Mary Oliver's writing and she kind of notes that Mary Oliver also had the same sort of perception of herself. To see a writer who is so prolific be self-conscious, and that's not like, you know, no one is immune from being self-conscious, but for us to think of her as thinking of her own writing as pedestrian and the fact that her writing is so powerful, and there is something to be said about writing something that can be accessed by, like, you don't need to have an MFA to understand Mary Oliver. Like, you just need to have a heart to understand Mary Oliver. There's so much power in that, but I think then like pretension sort of gets in the way and muddles that sort of relationship that we have to art. And yeah, I think it just goes back to the question of like, you like what you like and you resonate with what you resonate with. And I mean, I think for people who are not in literary spaces to critique or to, you know, be whatever, like I'm just a girl and I like my Mary Oliver poem and it's okay. And I don't know, I just think it like having judgment about the thing that thrums in people is like a weird thing, but also very weird for us to know that like the writer also had her own sort of reservations and feelings about being accessible to like a mass as opposed to like the well-degreed few. Once I began looking for it, I saw the telltale traces of lyrical shame all over Oliver's work. Many poems seem to announce their own shortcomings outright, as if preempting accusation of self-indulgence and sentimentality. To my adult mind, what seemed truly singular in her alertness to the way feelings of shame and social inadequacy attend even our most seemingly private and aesthetic moments, if this lack of guile drew me to her work as a child, it is even more instructive to me as an adult, after decades of hiding my shameful desire for inclusion under layers of posturing and pretense. These days, the only poems that really embarrass me are the ones that refuse to wrestle in some way with their own smallness and contingency. A page of poetry, in some sense, is no place at all, and it is fitting that we feel a little shame when we attempt to leave society to visit it. I just thought it was fascinating, so I'll link that down below as well. I've also just been spending some more time on Substack, and two Substack writers that I've really been enjoying. I've been reading a lot of like style writers. So Anna Newton, I've been really enjoying her posts, and MilkFed. I feel like MilkFed is pretty big on Substack, so you probably have heard of her, but her writing is so stunning. Like I remember I was on the plane back and she had a list of like 10 things that have made her life better. And it was just like a list of silly little things, but the way that she wrote these beautiful blurbs about like a neck massager type of chocolate or something, it was just beautiful. It brings me a lot of hope that there's another space where creators can share their work, and I'm really enjoying like dedicating some time to that space. If you guys have any like Substack writers that you're really enjoying, let me know, put it down below. I went to 2 author chats. I went to see Arundhati Roy speak about her memoir, Mother Mary Comes to Me. This was such a special experience as someone who grew up on Roy's writing. There was like a span of time in my life where I had trouble finding books that I liked. I was just reading God of Small Things and like 3 other books. I read and reread that book. I read like Walking with the Comrades. I was just like in her world, and she kind of carried me through my early 20s. So to see her as like a early 30 something was really wonderful. She's so personable and so like grounded. I just loved hearing all the stories that she had to share. So yeah, that was like really cool and special to me. Also, I don't know if you guys have heard, but Sarah Jessica Parker, who is a judge on the Booker Prize, she has started her own imprint via Zando. And I was invited to an event at Happy Medium, which is like officially my favorite place in the city, to celebrate the release of Victoria Reddle's book, I Am You. was really fun to make art and talk about art. It was just really beautiful to me to be in a space where like art and literature join hands, because I think that's what I have been in my life thinking a lot about. I was talking to Reba and I was saying like I always want to engage in my creative practices more, but like my outlet is writing, and writing is painful for me. Writing is too in your brain, and like I can't turn the editor off and I can't turn the audience off, and even if I'm just like journaling, for some reason it's never like cathartic to me. Like I just feel more weighed down by the act of writing. I keep saying like I want a way to enter flow and to like express myself creatively that's not in writing, but I'm not like a drawer and I don't know how to paint and I don't know how to do any of these things. And so it's funny because at that same time, like I was having all of these conversations, like I was speaking to my friend Adeline, and she's like a gorgeous oil painter, and she was like, yeah, I just like one day started playing on a canvas, and she's so good. She's so good at what she does now. At this event, I was sitting next to Maura, who has like a cool little subscription project going where she will send a print, but she's also like an oil painter. She did the art for the event, and it was just so fascinating to like be around these people who are making like visual arts, and I want to play around with visual arts too. It was just like very kismet-y, like a perfect event for like where I was in life. Super excited to get into this one. There are a couple of other books by SJP Lit, like Room 706 is on my radar. It's about like a woman in London contemplating like a relationship. You already know that's precisely my cup of tea. They also published a Lucy Caldwell book, which I wanna read. Really interesting imprint. Super fun. That was like the coolest event I have ever been invited to. Like that was really, really fun. I think the last thing I want to talk about are podcasts. Just one. What About Bob? This is Reba Reads podcast. I am not a movie person, but I had so much fun listening to this podcast. It's her and her friend going over like different movies. A lot of them are like horror movies, but it's just so fun to hear their commentary. I just love hearing people who love a thing talk about their love for a thing. And that's what that felt like. It felt like two friends hanging out and having all of this like niche information about these movies. It's a freaking delight. So I would highly recommend listening to that. That is it. We did it. I have another video coming out, and then it's like my favorite time. I love the end of the year because I love seeing like everyone's favorite reads and favorite things. I love being on BookTube at this time of year. But yeah, let me know how you've been, what you're reading. Is it good? Should I pick it up too? And we will see each other very soon. Take care. Bye.